So yes, I just want to start with, obviously Jenny Delandre or Jenny Cumberland is usually hosting these with RCS, and she's overseas. So I'm just going to jump in for her as this other part of being the ACT regional agricultural facilitator. So I'm just she's the main regional agricultural facilitator, but I just do a small role with that. So I'd just like to firstly acknowledge that today we're meeting on, well, most of us would be meeting on the lands of the Ngunnawal people, and pay our respects to our elders past, present and emerging. And wherever you're meeting on today, also just like to acknowledge that the funding for this webinar series has come from the Future Drought Fund, and this is part of the Farm Business Resilience Program. So just thank them for making this possible, and over to you, David.
Thanks, Mary. Good afternoon to everybody. That's good. This is part 3 of a 4-part series that, pardon me, Matt Barton, who's online here today as well, have been running. So if you've missed any of the other ones, those sessions have been recorded. The reason for recording is they can go on the ACT NRM YouTube page. And so if you've missed them, they're there to go and catch up, or if you want to go and review any parts of it again, just encourage you to go and chop on that and have a bit of a look. And thank you to Mary and Jenny and Jared and the crew there for bringing this together. The session today is going to be focusing on production. So we've had a session talking about people and getting the best out of people. We've had a session around land and managing land that Matt ran, which focused on one of the big drivers of looking after land health in a grazing operation being stocking rate to carrying capacity and some of the different factors that go behind that. So if you didn't get a chance to catch that one, really encourage you to go and catch up on that recording. And today we're going to talk about the next of the 4 pillars, which is productivity and getting production into our operations. So how we're going to cover that, we're going to talk about what actually determines production. We're going to talk about production, what role does it play in your business? And then we're going to go into one of the big drivers of production is ruminant nutrition. So we're focusing on the grazing aspects here, and then going to finish off by talking about planning for production in your operation. So they're the 4 key areas we're going to be focused on. Now, if you've got any questions, please mark down the bottom of your screen there. You can, we've got a small group there, so you can just unmute yourself and jump in with a question as you go, or you can go down to reactions on the bottom of your screen and raise your hand if you've got something that you'd like to jump in with. And the other option you got is down the bottom, you'll see a chat button. And so you can see chat and you can just type in a question or a comment as we're going. So there's a few different ways that you can interact, and we'd love for you to do that as well. If you've got questions, we'd love to have a chat about them. I'd like to, and if your internet is good enough, we would love it if you can leave your videos on. So those of you who've got them on, thank you. It's nice to be able to see some faces, so we're not just talking to a single screen. What I want to start with is I want to have a bit of a chat around what actually determines the level of production in your operation. So what actually drives the level of productivity in your operation? So let's have a bit of a chat about that. So you'll be able to hopefully see a little mind map there. So this is the chats where I'm actually pretty sure I would like to ask you to unmute and to let us know. So, and John, we might start with yourselves, please, if you can unmute yourself. And what is it that you see that drives and determines productivity in your operation? What are some of the factors that influence how productive your animals are?
Rainfall.
Rainfall, absolutely. That's a big one. And right on cue, I can hear rain on the tin roof here where I am. It's just started as you said it. So rainfall's a big one.
I've got connections, you see.
I like your work. That's fantastic. And Bruce, what would you add? And I'm just going to go around, so have a bit of a think about it for yourselves. We're going to skirt around the group. Bruce, what would you add and what determines production?
Being, largely a first cross lamb job, a good winter, or, good conditions during lambing helps with the productivity, much higher lambing percentages.
Yeah, absolutely. So good conditions during lambing. Now, what determines good conditions? If we were to dig into that one a bit more, what would drive that?
Yeah, so the terrible trifectas, rain, wind, and cold. If we have rain and cold, we're okay. If we have wind and cold, we're okay. But if we got all three together, we typically lose most of whatever's born that evening, that night.
Yep, great. Thanks, Bruce. Brian, if your audio is working, would you mind just unmuting yourself and adding to it?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess for sort of livestock producers, having sort of healthy animals.
Right. Absolutely. Animal health is a big driver of animal growth production. Great. Thanks, Brian. Mary, what would you add? You got your operation.
Probably, grass and access to, quality forage and water.
Absolutely. So access to our quality forage. And I'll split it out because I think it's a pretty important one, is our water quality and quantity as well. Absolutely. Thanks, Mary. Paul Hewitt, how are you going? Is your audio working? What would you add to that list? Just down the bottom left.
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me now, David?
Yeah, gotcha. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, look, that's getting it covered reasonably well. Obviously, soil health to give you healthy pastures, and to utilise the rainfall as well as you possibly can. But and then grazing strategies like allowing adequate recovery for pastures.
Excellent. So grazing strategies, for example, recovery. Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that, Paul. Peter, what would you add? Microphone just might not be working there, Peter. So if you want to pop something into that group chat, we can grab that there, and we'll jump onto Ruth and see what you would add, and then I'll also ask Megan and Matt what you would add as well, please.
What about like sunshine, like the days of sort of optimal growing conditions, sunshine and warmth?
Yeah, sunshine, warmth, and daylight length. Is that part of what you just mentioned then as well, Ruth?
Yeah, yep. Throw that in there as well.
Yep, that's part of that sunshine aspect and access to it. It's a big driver of that little thing called photosynthesis, which kind of drives everything we talk about. Excellent. I think that's there. Megan, what would you add?
Reproduction. So reproduction rates and timing of reproduction. So when the lambs or cattle are dropping, and what that matches up with the season.
Absolutely, and we can split that off to our timing of reproduction. Yeah, are we working in sync with nature, or are we fighting against nature? A big driver of that. A big one. Thanks, Megan. Matt, what would you add?
Well, this is probably very obvious, David, but I'd think of land type and location of your land, and maybe genetics as well.
Absolutely. So land type, and which is going to be very much driven by location. And yeah, absolutely. Genetics will be a big driver and play a role. Very good. So we've got rainfall driving pasture growth, retention of soil moisture. Thanks, Peter. So we've got the rainfall, and I think it's a good one to separate out. Actually, I think if we might do that is we've got our rainfall, but then we've got our retention of moisture, which is a separate one to rainfall, isn't it? That's that retention of moisture. Excellent. So that's a pretty great list there. I want to ask you a question now. Whenever you, and we could probably keep going for a while there. I think we've captured some of the big ticket items that drive production, and we could quite literally spend the next 4 days just talking about this and probably still only just scratch the surface, couldn't we? But specific to your operation, if we were to think about what it is that you can control versus those things that absolutely influence productivity, which is this whole little mind map here. But out of these ones here, which ones have we got some control over? And let's go through and highlight some of the ones. So do we have some control over animal health? So we do, don't we? We can control that one. Can we choose our land types or our locations? And I'd like to take that a step further now in terms of, can we choose which paddocks we're running certain animal classes on? Because you're going to have a range of land types within your own properties, aren't you? Very few properties are uniform. So, but we can control that. Would you agree? I'm looking for some nods on camera, those of you on camera. Soil health. Can we influence our soil health? Got a control over that? We can control that one to a degree. What about rainfall? Can we control how much rain we receive? Unfortunately not, regardless how well connected you are, John. At the end of the day, that they tend to not check their emails quite as often as you might like. And so that one there, we unfortunately can't control. However, it absolutely has an impact on production though. What about moisture retention on the other hand? Can we control that one? Would you say around that? We can, can't we? We can control the amount of organic matter we've got. And it's really important within our planning, and when we're doing your whole farm plan, to think about the plans on how we increase water retention. How do we increase that organic matter that we're going to have access to? Sunshine, the warmth, the daylight length. Where does that one sit, Ruth? Can we control that one? I think there was one that you add to the list. You just want to unmute yourself for us.
Well, no, I don't. Well, let me think. I guess not. I guess you can't really control the sunshine or the daylight length. No, I guess so. Yeah,
so sunshine's a bit hard, and daylight length we can't. I'd probably say that warmth to a degree we can control.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, warmth. Yes, you could.
So we can't control the ambient temperature, but we can control the amount of ground cover we're leaving, and root mass, which does have an influence. So we can give ourselves a half mark on that one, I think. Conditions during lambing, that really powerful trifecta that you talked about, Bruce. Pretty hard to control that one, isn't it? However, absolutely has an impact. Would you agree?
Yeah, we can mitigate against them, but yeah.
And what are the main things that you found effective?
Effective preying. No, I mean lambing paddock selection is the key piece. So we always maintain a few paddocks for lambing, something with the right aspect and ideally a bit of poa tussock or something in there to provide a shelter, and then shearing closer to lambing and make sure the ewes are feeling the cold as well. Make them sort of hunt out for the warmer parts.
Yep. So paddock selection, I've just added that in there, and I'll also add in there, and this is a big topic. However, it's such an important one, and this is your timing of operations. Such as the example that Bruce just mentioned there was around shearing. So that's very much within our control there, isn't it? But unfortunately, when it comes to these conditions, we can't influence that one too much ourselves. What about your reproduction rates and timing of reproduction? Can we control that one? Can we influence it? What would you say? Nod or shake your heads for your nods? Yeah, I think we can have a lot of influence over that, and we can absolutely influence that timing. It's up to us when we put our rams in or when we put our bulls in. Water quality and quantity, can we control that one? Yep, we can. And if you've got bad quality water, then it comes down to what strategies do we use to control that. Genetics. Matt, can we control the genetics that we're using? Yeah, absolutely. Access to quality forage. Now, this really links back to what Matt mentioned last week. It's around stocking rate to carrying capacity. So, Mary, would you say that we can control the access or the forage that we're providing access to? The unmute button was
Yes, sorry, it just takes a while to unmute. Yes.
absolutely, we can do that one. And then grazing strategies, we absolutely can. So if we look at the things that are highlighted on this list here, what do they primarily link back to? What's the big driver or the big aspect behind most of these things? What word would you use? What comes to mind?
Management.
Management, absolutely. Thanks, Ruth. I'm the same. To me, the bits that we can control, the big driver of production is it's us, isn't it? It's the decisions that we're making as we're the stewards, aren't we? We're in terms of our stewards of our animals and stewards of our landscape. And so, you know, it's quite intuitive and it makes sense. And I think it's just important that we do come back to the big driver of production. It comes back to what we're providing our animals. So I'll flick back into into these other images here now. And I want to just bridge there now to let's not confuse activity with productivity. And you can see here, there's a lot of activity here. This bloke there with a little bike pump on that considerably large wheel, and he's definitely got the work cut out in front. So it can be very busy, but is it going to be producing the outcomes that are required, that level of productivity? And it's important we always think about outcomes. What's going to be the flow-through effect of that? And whenever we're talking about productivity, I want to talk about one of the key diseases that I see in agriculture that we need to be thinking of. And one of the key diseases, and that's where we confuse production with profit. So production does not equal profit. Okay? Production does not equal profit. And I want to separate that. Production is one of the drivers of profit, but production doesn't equal profit. And Matt, I'm wondering if I can throw to you to comment on that statement and how you see it, please.
Thanks, David. One of the biggest disappointments with our industry is that everything is focused on production, and I find that incredibly frustrating. And it comes back probably to the previous slide of don't confuse activity with productivity. It keeps coming back to the 80-20 rule. And when we start to analyse our business, we'll find that quite often 80% of the profits coming from 20% of the work. And we've got to start focusing in on that. And I think too many farmers view being busy and working hard as part of the industry, where I'd suggest that it's more working smarter and focusing on where the big wins are, and going back to that 80-20 rule. David?
Thanks, Matt. And if we think about what determines profit, and if we look at just really simple economics, profit is determined by the value of what you produce minus the cost of what you produced. And so having the highest level of productivity doesn't automatically equal the highest level of profitability. It comes back to what did it actually cost you to produce that? So you might have the best lambing percentage in the district, or you might have the heaviest weaners and best weaning rate. Now, let's say you've got a weaner there, and you might have let's talk cattle as an example, you might have a $1,200 weaner there. But if it's costing you $1,500 to produce that weaner, the productivity is not actually creating the outcome that we might like. Now, as an industry, because sometimes we'll look at the $1,200 weaner, that big weaner, and we might look at a weaner that might only be $800 and go, oh, those guys there, not very good managers, are they? They've only got an $800 value weaner. But what if it only cost them $400 to produce that weaner? So it's not about the value, the level of productivity. It's about what did it cost us to produce it. And it's that the the holy grail we're looking at in business is that margin between the two, the difference between the value of what we produce and what it costs us to produce it. And we want the cost to be lower than what's there. And so I think we don't, this is an area we could really improve on. I'll be interested to see if anybody disagrees, but definitely in our experience and all the parts of Australia and the world we travel around, we see this focus on, we've got to get big, we've got to get that productivity, we've got to get the weight gains up, we've got to get the repro rates up. Don't always take into account the cost of achieving that. And that's where I think we need to shift that focus onto profit. So I just thought I'd mention that, even though we are talking about productivity, because it is important. However, we've got to make sure that it's not all about profit. And the next session, the final one in this series that Mary and her team have asked us to come and present, the one that Matt's doing next month, is on profitability. So Matt will unpack this topic a hell of a lot more in that session. So let's jump back in and let's move on to where we're going with this now. Profit is, and this is what we call the pyramid of profit, this little diagram. So profit's a function of gross margin. And this is one of our 3 secrets of profit that Matt will talk about. So we've got gross margin. Now, gross margin is a function of productivity. And so that's the value of what we produce compared to our direct costs, which gives us our gross margin. So productivity is important. It's not that we want to discount it. Now, what drives productivity though? Productivity is a function of the nutrition that we're giving to our animals. And the nutrition we're giving to our animals is a function of the quality and quantity of pasture, that access to quality forage that Mary talked about before. What determines the pasture quality and quantity comes back to, as Ruth pointed out, it's management. It's our pasture management that absolutely drives the quality and quantity of pasture that our animals have access to, because we're the ones that are determining where they are and how many we've got. How we manage our pastures is going to be determined by and change with our plant growth rates. So those grazing strategies we need to take into account is our management here. The plant growth rate, and therefore how we management, is going to change on how effectively our plants are using available sunlight, rain and soil. And Paul, I agree, we might not be able to control how much sun we get, but we can control our photosynthetic efficiency. How effective are our solar panels operating? How effective our country is using sunlight, rain and soil is a function of our ecological health. So if we want to be achieving long-term profitability in economic terms in an operation, we've got to build that up in terms of achieving long-term improving ecological health. So we need to be regenerating our landscapes and building those landscapes. And in a grazing operation, the majority of this pyramid of profit comes back to how we manage our grass. And we want to be building from the base up. So we're going to poke into a couple of these topics as we go through. Matt, anything you'd add before I move on? Just on mute, yeah.
Just going back to the profitability, that, you know, the great example we've got in RCS of the gentleman that was aiming to get 95% joining of his heifers, and that was the top, you know, production KPI of that source of animal. And when we sat down and analysed it, it was costing him, through making hay and feeding the animals, it was costing him $25,000 a year to achieve that. And so he'd been doing that for 15 years. So we really need to sort out what is making us money and what isn't. And it's generally keeping us busy as well. Thanks, David.
Yeah, exactly. Without that decision to grow that, it was a loose and wasn't an operation, grow that loose and cut that loose and get those heifers to get them up to weight and condition. The cost of doing that and feeding that animals was costing him $25,000 relative to the value of that extra conception. And so, yeah, you know, without doing that, he might have achieved a lower level. Well, he would have achieved a lower level of conception. However, his profitability would have been higher. It's a great example. You see it in sheep quite a lot too, don't we? Thanks, Matt. So let's move on. So, I mean, building on from this pyramid of profit here, that it all comes back to grass. And I think this is really important as we bridge across and just spend a moment talking about the importance of nutrition is that the cheapest form of nutrition is well-managed grass. And I'd encourage you to have something like that as a bumper sticker just punched up on your wall, just as a reminder to all of us, because if we start to think about, oh, what am I doing with our nutrition program, our head quite often all goes to, what do I feed my animals in terms of a nutrition plan? And I think our fundamental foundation that we need to think about is well-managed grass is our cheapest form of nutrition. And then anything that we feed above and beyond that, that's when we start to increase profitability rather than just trying to make sure we're feeding animals. And so to talk about this, and I just want to really quickly overview how grass actually grows. And so on this axis here, we've got time, and then we're going to look at the yield of grass relative to our root activity and mass below ground. And this is work that was originally done by a botanist called Andre Voisin in terms of how grass grows. So in phase one, we've got slow growth through time. Then we've got fast growth through time. In the top of phase two, your plants will really set themselves up and they'll set up their root systems. So the plants are growing, they get to the top of phase two, and then they punch a lot of energy into their secondary root systems and really set up their ability to produce throughout the year. And then it goes into what we call phase three. And so phase one, we don't have much bulk here. Phase two, we've got increasing amounts of bulk, and three, we've got high amounts of bulk. So the difference between phase one and two here is photosynthetic capacity. And so it's about the amount down here, we just don't have enough leaf out to have the solar panels to photosynthesize effectively. When we click over into phase two, this is where we've got enough solar panels out and our plants are actually starting to grow off solar power, whereas here they're relying on stored energy down in the root systems. So one way of looking at it is back here, they're operating off battery power, and then they flick a switch and go into the solar system here. Okay, they change that energy source. If an pardon me, I'm just recovering from a man flu. As we go across into phase three here, what happens is your plant's still growing a little bit, but now because it's reached its mature size and height, instead of putting that into new forage, or particularly the carbohydrate of cellulose, which we'll touch on in a moment, it now starts to produce a different carbohydrate called lignin. And lignin is essentially wood. So our phase three grass is more woody. The quality of that feed starts to drop off. So if we draw our quality curve over this, phase one grass is excellent quality. That's rocket fuel, but we just don't have much of it. Phase two is where we start to see some declining in quality, but we've got high quantity. And then phase three, our grass quality in terms of our productive capacity, it falls off a cliff and comes right down low. Now, if you're dealing with any C4 or tropical grasses, that's going to happen a lot faster than what it will in your C3s and just won't hold on as well. I think it's important too, if we come back to, you mentioned soil health as being one of the production of drivers before. And what drives soil health, at the end of the day, it's actually root systems and root diversity mixed with green leaf that drives soil health. At the end of the day, everything we talk about, it comes back to root systems, root diversity, and green leaf. They're the things that actually help us to improve soil health. In phase one, it's a mirror image. If we don't have much above ground, we don't have much below ground. And then as we get more above ground, our root activity and mass increases. However, unfortunately, when we go into phase three, which is an over-rested plant, our root mass and activity comes back to not very much at all. And if we think about roots as being like a muscle, if we don't use a muscle, if we break an arm and it ends up in plaster, over time our muscle wastes away, doesn't it? We get that muscle atrophy, and purely because it's not being used. And it's exactly the same thing here with our root systems. So where do we want to be? We want to be here in phase two, don't we? This is where we've got our best combination of the quantity of feed, the quality of feed, and our root activity and mass. And this is the horsepower in a grazing operation, is to have less phase one and less phase three and more phase two. Because in reality, you will have all three. You can't have everything in phase two. That's just not a realistic expectation. But we want to increase the proportion of leaf. As we go through the year and as we go through the conditions, and you mentioned a lot of these conditions before that determine growth and grass productivity, our grass will grow at different speeds. So in periods of really nice growing conditions, it'll go from phase 1 to 3 in a really short time frame. And this depends on your pasture species. For some of you, you might have kikuyu, which will get up there in 15, 20 days. If you're dealing with some of your tropicals, it could be 45 days to get out there. So it really depends on where you are and the type of species. But that same species, as your growing conditions change, it might take a lot longer to get up to the top of phase 2 and click into phase 3. Pardon me. And longer again. Matt, I'm going to throw to you to add anything you'd like on that while I cough.
Yeah, thanks, David. It's really a point that if we keep our plants, a majority of our plants in phase 1, generally that majority will be the most palatable plants. And as we keep them in phase 1, we'll kill them. And so we get a situation where we have to repasture our paddocks every 5, 7, 10 years. And if we keep our plants in phase 3 or let them to go into phase 3, then we're starting to harm our animals. So as David said, it really is focusing on the two, and the grazing management then comes back to watching the grass, how quickly it grows, and what it's doing with the sunlight and the rain and the soil health, and matching that growth rate with the rest periods that we need to incorporate to allow that grass to get back into, to stop it going into phase 3, number 1, and allowing it to get back to the top area of phase 2. So I remember speaking to a investor in New York, and I put this up on the board, and he said, don't all graziers do that? And a lot of us don't, but it really is a powerful one about using what is free, what's available to us for free, where we can really start to power not only what we're feeding our animals, but power our microbiology. So it's a photosynthetic capacity that is driving the sugars. Over 40% of a plant's energy will go into the root system. 70% of the plant's energy will go into the root system, and 40% of that goes out to feed the microbes. And so if we can keep it in phase 2, not only are we really feeding our animals well, we are also feeding our microbes to its maximum capacity. Then we start building soil health, more grass, better moisture retention. Everything starts to flow from that phase. Thanks, David.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. It's knowing your grass inventory and that monitoring that Matt talked about is such a big driver of your productivity. Because if we don't know and manage our grass inventory and get the best out of them for the conditions that you've been dealt, then we're putting a lot more pressure on what comes out of a bag. And we want to really make sure that what we're using out of a bag is supplementing good quality grass. And we'll so the key thing with that, just to summarise some of that, is to be aware of that. That's such a we spend a lot of time in this in the grazing for profit and grazing schools that we run, because this is absolutely pivotal to think about this and how you might apply these concepts to your operation. How are you managing time in your grazing operation, and are you adjusting time based on the varying growth rates? A lot of you will be doing rotations, which is fantastic, but is the rest period adjusted to suit the growth rate of the plant? That's the important question to ask yourself with it. So let's move on now to nutrition. So what is essential for nutrition? Water is first and foremost the primary one. So 10% of your animal's body weight is going to be its water. And then it's going to be energy. So 85 to 90% of what an animal extracts from its feed is going to be energy for performance. Then followed by protein. So 8 to 15%. So younger animals, higher protein requirements, and older animals, that comes back a bit. Then we get into our macro minerals. And these are the things that we measure in grams per head per day. So phosphorus, calcium, sulfur, to name a few. As opposed to our micro minerals, zinc, cobalt, selenium sit here. These are things that we feed in milligrams per head per day, so much smaller quantities. And then we've got our vitamins that our animals need as well. And in 99% of cases, they're going to extract the vitamins they need from their landscape if we've got diversity and we've got our grazing. So that's our essential components. And I'm going to run you through, if you've done any work with RCS, you know we have a very heavy focus on principles. So we've got principles for nearly every major component of your business that you need to run. And these are the principles for ruminant nutrition. Principle number 1 is that water is a critical nutrient. Principle number 2 is that production needs adequate energy availability. Principle 3 is your rumen bug populations determine feed intake and protein. And principle number 4 is we want to balance our minerals for optimal production. And principle number 5 is supplementary feeding must be profitable. So they're the 5 principles to consider when you're thinking about your ruminant nutrition plan. So principle number 1, water is a critical nutrient, and just the same as it is for us. And I think we talked back in the first one of these sessions around people. If you're sitting in the office, and no matter where you are, hopefully you've got a glass of water sitting there with you, because we've got to make sure we've got our water intake in, because we can't function without water and oxygen. What's the purpose of water in our animals? One of the really huge drivers of this, and these are all important, is managing that blood osmotic pressure. So what's the pressure within that blood system? This is critical when it comes to the ability of your animals to transfer nutrients to where it's needed for movement and productivity. Don't have enough water, you don't have the blood osmotic pressure, and those nutrients can't get pushed through that blood wall. Temperature regulation. You know, in those really hot periods, water is a major component of that. Transporting nutrients, and that ties in with our blood osmotic pressure. Creation and production of saliva and milk, and also for eliminating waste products. And so what's coming out the back or bottom end. So that's some of the key purposes of it. Where does water come from? Obviously, we've got our drinking water. We need to focus on 2 key components of this. We need to think about the quality of the water as well as the quantity of the water. And I honestly feel a lot of businesses are probably cutting themselves short here in terms of these 2 factors here. And we might be trying to do something on the cheap and just keep things within our means. The question we need to ask ourselves here is at what cost? Because if our animals aren't drinking enough, they physically can't eat enough. So there's a direct correlation between feed intake and water intake. So if the water, drinking water available doesn't taste any good, or if it's, they don't get enough of it, they won't drink enough, so therefore they can't eat enough. And if they're not eating enough, the total nutrient intake drops, productivity drops, gross margin drops, profit drops. And so really thinking about that availability of water is quite important. Your feed supply plays a role as well. And so if they're on lush green feed, they're going to need less out of a trough than what they might out of the paddock. And the atmospheric conditions also play a role. The intake is going to be dependent on the lactation level. So if it's a pregnant or if it's a lactating animal, the size of the animal has a big impact, just in terms of the volume of feed, water that it's going to need relative to its actual size. And your atmospheric conditions, again, are going to play a role. Hotter conditions, higher water intake. A rule of thumb, and now this is, I personally don't think this varies depending on scale. And so whether you're running a pretty small operation with a few head, or whether you're running an extremely large commercial operation, the flow rate into your trough is a really important one. So I would recommend in this area here that you be wanting at minimum flow rate into your trough of 2 litres per second. Now, if you're in hilly country, that's actually quite easy to achieve because you've got gravity as your friend to achieve that. And so then it's just about how you get that flow rate into the trough, because what we're trying to avoid is that water level in the trough dropping. When that water level in the trough drops, animals have got this most beautiful ability to communicate without speaking, without talking. And I'm sure anybody who's worked with livestock, I reckon, has seen that situation where the water level starts to drop and animal behaviour starts to change. They start to stress, they start to communicate to the back going, hey, we're getting a bit short on water here. Probably should do something about this. And as a result, they go, crikey, we're going to run out of water. and they all come starting putting more pressure in. And this is where you end up with animals in the trough. You end up with busted floats and busted fences around, which takes away time from something else, doesn't it? Which has an impact. And so that a lot of that comes back to flow rate into your trough. And so any new work that you're doing, or if you're observing flow rate issues, animals standing around a trough waiting for that flow, if we want to improve productivity, that might be one of the areas that we consider putting some focus on initially, because it could be having quite a large impact. I was doing some work with the dairy industry in Victoria a number of years back, and I asked some of these dairy producers, I said, hey, after you had an impact on water, how long did it take for those animals to get back to peak production again, peak milk production? And it's such a heavily measured system, isn't it? So it's great because they've got all this data. And there's one fellow there said I had an impact there last year, and it took those cows a month to get back up to the same levels of production they were before. Now, milk, I mean, dairy cows, obviously a huge water intake requirement because they're producing so much milk. But if you've got a lactating cow, they're not going to be far behind that dairy cow. And if we wind that back, and let's say it's only for 2 weeks, if you've got animals that you're wanting to put on weight on, that can take a long time to get that back. And so just be careful of putting in pipes that are too small to save money, because it might be costing you more than you're saving if those animals don't have that flow rate. Matt, what would you add to that in your experience?
Absolutely critical. The animals will know, let you know within minutes. But it's really it makes sense when you think about the animal. In the history of the animal, they are used to drinking at spots where the water level doesn't drop after they start drinking. So in over eons, they'll be drinking out of rivers, out of potholes, out of whatever. So it makes sense that they start to panic if that water level drops. It's an inherent fear in those animals, and we've got to try and combat it wherever we can. And it's prohibitively expensive to fix up your water supply, and it can really restrict the types of businesses and the types of grazing operations that you run. Thanks, David.
Which becomes really frustrating, doesn't it, Matt? I mean, how many places have we been to where they've started to improve their grazing practices and improve their carrying capacity, and then their watering system can't support the number of animals they were running, let alone the additional carrying capacity potential now. And that's a really frustrating position to be in.
Yeah, David, when I put my watering system in, I asked for 4 litres a second, thinking one day I might get there. My father thought I was a fool because he'd never run more than 300 cows at one time. And we had the season, the grass was better, and we were running 1,400 weaned cattle. Thank God I put that watering system in, because once you get over 800 head, you've got to go up to that 4 litre, and you never know how well things will start to go. So that's my experience. Always overdo it.
Yeah, a good rule of thumb when you're designing a watering system is to double the maximum number of animals you reckon you run now, and then double that again, and design a water program to support that. It might take you a while to put in, because your financials will be the limiting factor. However, you don't want to do it cheap and not do a job that's going to support your business long term. I don't recall ever having a client come to me and go, geez, I regret putting in that size water system that you recommended. However, there's a big, long list of people that have come back and said, I wish I'd listened to you. I thought you were full of insert what you want to insert there. I thought you're absolutely talking rubbish. And then they've pretty well all come back and go, I wish we'd listened to you. Matt, you'd have a similar line of people with the same story. So that's that water. And again, if you think about trying to get our basics right, if our animals don't have adequate water, or if we don't have our stocking rate matched to carrying capacity, it actually, it's pretty hard to get return on investment for feeding anything else. Got to get those basics right. They're the foundations that will give you the leverage points. So if we move on to principle 2, is that production needs adequate energy availability. I have fun going and finding some of these memes and putting in the skills. And so we're going to think about, okay, energy. So where does energy come from? Our primary source of energy, as you identified early on, is sunlight, our ability to capture sunlight energy. And so we got our carbon dioxide with our water or water vapor, plus chlorophyll, the green leaf in our plants, and sunlight gives us carbohydrates, oxygen, and water. So that's our photosynthetic equation that basically drives our lives. It's such an important equation. Now, the carbohydrates that we're working with, we've got sugar. So if we're feeding animals any molasses, that's going to be the primary carbohydrate that we're feeding there. Starch, so if you're feeding your animals any grain, the carbohydrate source that we're using there is starch. When we're grazing animals on any forage, be that grasses or forage crops, the carbohydrate that we're actually feeding there is cellulose. And that's so the grazing industry is built around the ability to access cellulose as that energy source. And then we've got oil as a source of energy. So if you're feeding any meals, that's going to be contributing to that megajoules of metabolizable energy that we've got to work with. And then the other carbohydrate that comes in is lignin, which, as I mentioned before, is what we get with that phase 3 plant and that wood. So what we're trying to do, if we want to increase that energy availability, we want to increase the proportion of cellulose, which is what we have in phase 2 leaf. We've got our best quality and quantity, and reducing the amount of lignin that we have. So if we take our gross energy that comes in, that's in a plant, the energy that goes out of the animal as feces, that's the undigestible or indigestible portion. And that's going to be linked to the amount of lignin that's in that forage. So the more lignin, the more that's lost out the back end. It just goes right through the whole animal. So what we're left with is our dry matter digestibility. So this digestible portion of gross energy. We then got our loss of energy into methane and urine, which, everything else being equal, sits about 19% of digestible energy. We've got that loss of energy here. It gives us our metabolizable energy. We then lose a portion of our metabolizable energy to maintain body temperature. So if it's really cold and animals are shivering, that's going to take a lot of energy. And if it's really hot and they're really having to pant to get more airflow to try and cool themselves down, that's going to take a lot of energy as well. So trying to provide that climate, and that's that paddock selection we talked about as well before, to try and minimise the amount of energy that will go into maintaining temperature. And then we got out of this net energy then, it goes to two places. The first place it goes is into maintenance of basic bodily functions. And so the bigger the animal, the bigger the maintenance requirements. And I think if you're operating on small scale, if you're operating on big scale, if you're operating livestock, we really need to be conscious of the maintenance requirements of your animals. And I'll just mention this and then park it for a discussion with you another time, is that if we look at the sheep and the cattle industry, we're now breeding sheep that are nearly the size of cows, and we've got cows that are nearly the size of elephants. So I'm exaggerating a touch, but not by a hell of a lot when we look at the changes in these animal sizes. The key problem with that is that the bigger the body weight of the animals, that mature weight, the bigger the maintenance requirements. So therefore, the more feed, the more energy, protein, minerals that it's going to have to eat and consume just to maintain itself. Now, it's important when looking at this diagram is that we make no money out of maintenance. We make all of our money out of energy intake or intake above maintenance, which goes into productivity. So this is where we've got our weight gain, and our milk production comes out here. So if we've got a really big cow, it needs a hell of a lot of nutrition coming in to maintain itself before it's going to have adequate nutrition to go into milk production. If we've got a big ewe, it's the same thing. And so it's about just thinking about moderate sized animals. So we've got more going into production, because this is the bit we get paid for. Weight gain, same thing. So lignin goes up here. If we think about availability of energy, lignin goes up, we're having more phase 3. This comes back to that management of our grazing. Digestibility comes down. Digestibility comes down, our rate of passage goes down. So how long it takes for feed to move through the ruminant system. Rate of passage slows down, therefore intake's got to slow down, because if the whole supply chain is slowed down, we can't just keep jamming food in the back end we need to reduce the intake because those rumens can only hold so much feed. As intake drops, the net energy drops. As net energy drops, production drops, gross margin drops, profit drops. So one thing goes up and everything comes down. So what we're looking at here is the digestibility is our big one. Now, unfortunately, what happens is as we get into drier conditions or your feed quality drops off, your digestibility drops, so the quality of each mouthful of feed is dropping off. And then combined with that, the rate of passage and therefore intake drops off. Now, if we think about this, if we wanted to maintain an equivalent level of performance, if the quality of each mouthful of feed is dropping, we actually would need them to eat more, wouldn't we? To still get the same amount of energy coming in. Whereas in fact, the amount they eat drops. So as you're going from good quality feed to poor quality feed, your effective nutrient intake drops back to about a quarter. So good quality feed, you'll find animals will be eating probably about 3% of body weight in that range there. You drop back to really poor quality feed, it can get down to 1.4, 1.5% of body weight intake, which is a huge difference. And we can link that back to what Matt talked about with stocking rate to carrying capacity, has a big impact with that. Principle number 3, rumen bug populations determine your feed intake and your protein. So this fella here didn't miss his protein shake. He's been following through on that one. And so here we've got some bacteria. And this is these rumen microbes that we're talking about. So let's just look at some numbers behind this. 1 mil of rumen fluid contains 10 to the power of 8, which is 1 billion rumen microbes. Each microbe is an individual wee beastie, a bug in that rumen. The average lifespan of each of these microbes is about 20 minutes. So therefore, they're turning over about 3 an hour. And the average size of a rumen is 60 litres for cattle and about 15 litres for sheep. Dairy cattle a bit bigger, and there's a lot of variables, but if you think of that as being a good average. So therefore, in a cow, we've got our 1 billion bugs per milliliter of rumen fluid, times our 60,000 mils of rumen fluid, times that by 24 hours a day, with our bugs turning over 3 times per hour because the average lifespan is only 20 minutes. So they end up with 1 billion times 4.3 million, which ends up with 320, lots of zeros, lots of zeros, lots of zeros, lots of zeros, microbes per day, roughly. So that's a hell of a lot of microbes turning over in the rumen of a cow on a daily basis, isn't it? And we divide that by 4, so that's a bit over, that becomes 1 there, but there's still a hell of a lot of zeros, the same number of zeros in a sheep's rumen. So these dead microbes, because they're turning over every 20 minutes, they make up about 70% of the protein intake in an animal. So most of your animal's protein intake is called microbial protein. It's your dead microbes. So we need to think about how do we keep our bug populations higher. This is a huge driver of ruminant nutrition. Now, I've taken this image from our Farmer's Guide to Ruminant Nutrition. And so we can see we've got a bit of a diagram there. There's our rumen. And we've got food coming into that. And in our food, we're focused on protein at the moment. We're going to have protein coming in, and it's going to be in 2 forms. It's either going to be your degradable protein, or it's going to be a bypass protein. A degradable protein is the one that can be, you've got one little lot of rumen microbes which break down your protein into peptides. We've got another lot of bugs that will break down the peptides into amino acids. And then these amino acids convert into ammonia. And it's this rumen ammonia level which determines your bug population in your ruminant animal. So it's the rumen ammonia level. So we need to think about, if we want to control bug populations, what we're actually looking for is the rumen ammonia. And how do we get that? If we've got plants that have got good amounts of plant protein, we're going to have high bug populations. And as a result, we're going to end up with good levels of microbial protein. If it's not coming out of a plant, this is where our non-protein nitrogen comes in. And it'll either come through the lick that we're feeding. So if we're feeding urea, that's a non-protein nitrogen. It's not a plant-based one. And urea converts straight to ammonia. So if we don't have the bug population to absorb that ammonia, we end up with excess ammonia in the system. Now, part of the normal process of what happens whenever animals are grazing or going about eating is that we've got these rumen ammonia levels and our excess ammonia goes off into the liver. Now, some of that is excreted as waste. If you've been in a confined space with a ruminant animal, you know you get that ammonia smell. So that's that excretion. However, a portion of the excess ammonia comes into the liver and it's converted to urea and goes into the blood system as blood urea. And then that travels through the animal and then ends up in the saliva. So a beef cow is going to swallow about 50 to 60 litres of saliva a day. A dairy cow, it's about 80 to 120 litres of saliva a day. I don't recall the sheep numbers off the top of my head, but I think they're about 10, 15 litres of saliva a day. And that saliva, every time they swallow that, so when they're masticating, when they're chewing their cud, that's got blood urea in it. That blood urea comes in as a form of non-protein nitrogen, which converts to ammonia, which helps to buffer and keep those rumen ammonia levels a bit higher. So this cycle is constantly occurring within the animals. Where we're going to be careful with the likes of urea is if we don't have the bug population to take up this excess ammonia and we get too much coming into the blood system, it's actually an ammonia toxicity that can kill them. So the rule of thumb, if you're feeding a non-protein nitrogen in the form of urea, is to start before you think you need to. So if it's a bit dry, like some of you are saying there, you've got to be really careful waiting until it's too dry. You're better off starting much earlier than you need. Because if you've got high amounts of plant protein, urea is really safe. They're not going to go and chase that. Would recommend just checking in on your nutrition plan. If there's any questions, we can cover them shortly. Final thing I want to cover here. So we've got our plant protein coming in and we've got our degradable portion, which basically goes to building rumen ammonia levels, so it feeds the bugs. And then we've got this bypass protein. Now, your bypass protein, it's non-degradable. So it bypasses the rumen microbes and directly feeds the animal. And so you think about most of our bypass proteins have got the word meal in them. So they've gone through some sort of heat process or processing that's denatured or changed the way that protein sits. So where it would have been degradable, so there is pretty well no bypass protein naturally occurring in nature. It all comes from some result of us doing something to it. And this is the thing about a lot of these things are a byproduct of processing. And that goes through and feed the animal. And if we follow this little diagram here through, it'll help. Again, this is out of our online program. Rumen degradable protein feeds the bug population. That's what we're trying to achieve here. And it gives, we've either got our crude protein, which is coming from grass or lupins or legumes, and our non-protein nitrogen, which is our blood urea and saliva or lick blocks. But degradable protein is consumed by the microbes, keeps our microbe levels up high, then the microbes die and they become the microbial protein as the protein source. So 70% of an animal's protein comes from dead bugs. Our non-degradable protein feeds the animal, and it's called bypass protein because it bypasses the microbes. So it's artificially created because it's gone through some sort of processing or extraction process, and that protein is absorbed directly by the livestock in their abomasum, so in their smaller intestine. Are there any questions at that point, or Matt, anything you'd like to add to we're talking about protein and energy there? It's a bit of a snapshot, but I think it's important that some of these key concepts that you're aware of them and you're conscious of it in your programs. Matt?
Yeah, no, the way I view it is that we've got to be basically knowledgeable of this process, because there's so much marketing that is focused towards us, and we've got to work out what we actually need. And what we need and what we don't need should be able to then clarify or draft through the marketing that's pushed towards us. Thanks, David.
And with that marketing, what I'd add to that is there'll always be trials that'll be given to you. Oh, we fed this and got this result. You've got to come back to what feed type was it on? What was the management of that feed beforehand? Because if it was a fresh phase 2 paddock, the efficacy and the value you're going to get out of a feed type is going to be very different to if you're putting animals onto a phase 3 paddock or a phase 1 paddock. And so you've got to really drill through what's in the marketing behind it. Shouldn't get us on that, man. Principle number 4 is to balance your minerals for optimal production. And this is what some businesses start to look like when it comes to the feeding program. Things are a little bit out of balance. And there's different, and it comes back to just understanding what does an animal need. Now, we've got a number of clients that are using a free choice option, whereby the animals can go in and they can actively select for the minerals that they are deficient in. And they've got animals, sheep and cattle, have got a process called nutritional wisdom. So whereby they know what they are short in and they know what makes them feel good, so they will go and seek those things that make them feel good. The benefit of a free choice, where you've got each individual mineral separated out, is that they can select. Whereas if you're putting out a lick that's got everything matched together, it's hard for them to select for that thing that they need. And this changes paddock by paddock. It's amazing how much animals will self-select for what they need in 2 paddocks, which to the human eye look absolutely identical. And to be careful too, if you're putting out a combination lick, so a mixed lick, if they're chasing one particular thing, if they're heavily deficient in one thing, they might chase that in large quantities, which might mean they get toxic levels of intake of another element. And that's one of the things we're seeing, such as urea. If animals are deficient in salt, they might go chasing the salt and get a gutful of urea, but it's actually chasing that salt. So having this free choice option, and a nice simple rule of thumb, is to just put straight salt out before you feed anything. Every single cell that we have has sodium as one of its compounds. And so it's a nice, safe, low-cost way just to see what they're deficient in. And this is one here, it hasn't been put on wheels yet, and this one here that was used to move around, this is what's called a low boy. And you can change your size, and this one's a bit lower cost if you're on smaller scale. You can make that up yourself, and it's designed for rainfall, high rainfall or windy country. Principle 5, supplementary feeding must be profitable. And Matt just touched on this a moment ago in terms of just filtering out, well, what are we getting told would be good versus what's actually going to work for us? And what we recommend when it comes to any nutritional program is to understand, what are your nutritional seasons? What does this graph look like for you? And so let's just take this. This is a C3 dominant type series, and your graph would look somewhat similar to this. So early on here, this nutritional season 1, we've got increasing quality and increasing quantity. So this is that shoulder season from winter into spring. We've then got high quality, high quantity in season 2 here. Season 3, we've got high quantity, but decreasing quality, and then we've got low quality at the end of it. If you get an autumn break, you're going to get increasing quality and quantity. Number 5 here is decreasing quality, decreasing quantity. And then in this light period here, if you get enough warmth coming through, you might get an increase in quality, but your quantity, the bulk of feed, might still be dropping off. So this just depends on where you are and what your conditions are, because you might pick up a bit of herbage, which will give you quality, but it might not give you quantity. So it just depends on where you are. Your nutritional needs are different in each one of these. So in this shoulder season here, I think one of the biggest drivers of production during this shoulder season comes back to what Matt talked about last month in stocking rate to carrying capacity. And it's about having standover feed, because this stuff here, if we link it back to our 3 phases, you're going to have a lot of phase 1 leaf here because it's coming into its growth stage again. And it's rocket fuel, isn't it? It's really high quality, but we don't have the quantity. And our animals will self-regulate, they'll buffer. And if we don't have any standover feed, some roughage there for them to slow down the rate of passage, that's when you end up with just too fast a rate of passage. And you'll find that even though what they're eating is bloody good stuff, they'll get the squirts and they can't slow it down. So I think standover feed is a big one here, and potentially some minerals. High quality, high quantity, usually your protein and energy should be pretty good here. So it's quite often a mineral deficiency, if anything, that's going to be most limiting production here. And the question we need to ask is, what's limiting production in my animals as they stand in the paddock right now? That's the way to look at it. What's limiting production of these animals as they stand, as this class of animal stands in the paddock right now? Not last year, not what worked 10 years ago, not what worked on another property. What works for you? Coming into your declining quality and quantity here, early in your summer period there, if you've got your feed quality starting to drop off, a bypass protein in this period here is quite often what's going to give you the biggest bang for buck. So you're still going to have digestibility in your grasses, but your protein levels will be starting to drop out, which is the only way you can control protein in your forage is through species diversity. Management, we can't really shift protein levels through management. And so bypass protein here, you can quite often get a 1-to-1 or even better return here. So every 500 grams of a bypass protein you feed there would equate to a 500 gram live weight gain. If you wait until down here to try and feed those animals, let's say it might be some weaner sheep up here, then this is the time to get weight on them if you want them at a certain weight coming into next year. Because if you wait till down here, the digestibility of the feed and therefore the energy availability will have dropped off. And so you've got a lot more to make up to get them to those levels of production. So they need energy as well as protein. Now, energy is much more expensive to feed because it's a bigger quantity, bigger bulk. Whereas back here, we've got the energy, so you can get really good bang for buck, about a 1-to-1 return here. But here you might be looking back, it could get down to a 1-to-2. So you might be feeding, for every 500 grams, you might only be getting 250 grams in growth. There's a rough rule of thumb. And as we go through here, this is where I'll be more feeding your degradable protein now. Because the protein's not in the grass, we want to give them some degradable protein out of a tub to hold your rumen ammonia levels up higher, to hold that performance up as you go. And as we're going through here, you've got to be, it's going to be protein and energy are going to be the limiting ones in these seasons here. Less so minerals, it could be, but it just depends on your specific location. Nutrition's, it's such a big topic and it's really complex. And I feel sorry for you as producers because there's so much conflicting advice out there. And so what I'd recommend is you educate yourself as much as you can. Do your own research. So we've got a really comprehensive online nutrition program that's built for farmers. Educate yourself as much as you can. Surround yourself with good people. Listen to a few different people and just think about these key concepts to help you out. The first one is that economic goals must come first. We've got to be feeding for profit. Accurate diagnosis comes second. What do your animals actually need as they stand in the paddock at the moment? Or what are they going to need in the next few months? That forward planning. Planning a nutritional program based on those nutritional seasons we just talked about. You know, do they need energy? Do they need protein? If it's protein, is it degradable or a bypass, or do they need a mineral? Come back to those ones. And then monitor your costs and production. I reckon last year I was asked to review more nutrition programs than I had in the 5 years before. Not sure what triggered that. And in a lot of cases where people ask me, hey, can you tell me whether this lick we're putting out is any good? It was concerning the number of people when I asked them, well, how much are they eating? And they said, oh, I'm not really sure. That makes it's impossible to actually talk about the effectiveness of any program if we don't know what they're eating. So monitor what they're eating, what their intake is, and monitor what impact it's having on production. So just get to know what's actually going on. And if what you're doing isn't working or it isn't profitable, do something different. You know, just start blowing up the phone, talking to people that are going to be able to help you out. And there's some really great people around the traps that can help you with this topic to get some information. What questions are running through your heads at the moment? We've got one key topic I want to go through to wrap up is what questions have you got? Mary, what's running through your head at the moment?
To be honest, David, I'm just thinking how much I didn't know about all this, actually. Yeah, so that's, yeah, I guess what's running through my mind.
Which
Yeah.
is why we wanted to go through those couple of high level things to make sure that we are aware of those big moving bits. All we've done here is touched on some big moving bits, haven't we?
Yeah.
Because it's important and nobody can know everything. We're always learning, and that's the exciting part, is there's always still so much for us to learn.
Yeah.
Matt, what would you add?
Mary, probably replying to you a bit, but in my mind, I know that I'll never be a nutritional expert, and I'm not going to try. But I do have people that I can go to, and a lot of producers will be in this basket that have a good idea of what's going on and have had good programs. So I reckon go out, work out where the good advice is, and stick to that. So there's a lot of Terry McCosker, who's the principal of RCS, is a animal nutrition or ruminant nutritionist, and he could bore you for 3 or 4 days if you let him about animal nutrition. And I've tried to suck in as much as I can, but I think I've got to be really aware of what I don't know, and leave it at that. That's the way I approach it.
Okay.
Because we can't know everything. No one person does, and it's important that we don't set that as being the objective. It's absolutely impossible. And running an agribusiness is such a complex business. There's so many different facets involved.
I think the biggest...
You just muted yourself again, Matt.
The biggest part of what David's tried to convey here is we get the big parts of the knowledge, so we know what we want to do, and then, as I said, we can draft off the information that's not going to suit us or fix up what we want to try.
If you take from that, what questions do you ask the people around you? I agree with Matt. There's so many producers that have really gone in and tried this stuff and tried different things, and go and talk to people. Hey, what did you feed? What animals were it to? What did you see? And you'll go to some and they'll go, oh, I don't know, I fed this. Yeah, I think it worked all right. And have a chat to them. They might not have that information they're looking for. It doesn't mean they're not good people and you won't learn something, but they might just not have enough. And just keep talking till you work out those people that have got good systems. And yeah, I'm the same. I go to a lot of producers when I've got nutritional questions. Hey, I know you did this a few years ago. Talk me through what you did again. What did you find? What was in that? Yeah, right. And what did you see? And I think that the producers are important. There's so much knowledge out there. What questions you want to ask, and that's where I think this might be helpful. And if you're talking to somebody and they can't help you to work out the cost of return on investment, then maybe they're not the ones to help you out. So to finish off, and then we'll go through any other questions. I think the last part of optimizing production, and probably the most important part, comes back to your planning. The first bit we need to do if we're going to be planning is we need to know, what is your current reality? And so what is your current feed quality and quantity in each area? So what have you actually got to work with this year? And I can't emphasize the importance of that this year enough, that if you need to know what you've got to work with, not what you wish to have, not what you thought you should have had, not what you had last year, what's your actual on-ground reality now? And if you don't know, then when are you going to be able to create some space in your calendar to jump on the bike, or to whatever you need to do to go for a look around and just ground truth? What are your current stock numbers and type? And I want you to refer back to Matt talked about DSE ratings and the different DSE ratings on different classes in that last session. And this is really important in terms of when we're getting to matching our land types with what our animals need. So what do your different animal class types need? How many have you got this year? Each year you're going to have a different herd and flock composition. What's your current timing? If you've been doing any buying or selling of animals, your timing might be a bit different to what it might be otherwise. So therefore their nutritional demands are going to be different. So are you setting yourself up for a win? what's your marketing plan? So when are you planning on selling animals? And with that, what are the objectives? So I was just at a client's place this week and we were doing a grazing plan for a mob of heifers. And then I said, well, what's the plan with this mob? What are your intentions with them? And they said, oh, they're a mob of feeder heifers, so they're going to be getting sold. So we couldn't finish doing the grazing plan until we went and actually pulled up and had a look at what the spread of weights were and thought about where they were planning on running them, what the potential weight gains there, and therefore, when's the sale date? And then we went out and had a look at some of those paddocks, and some of those paddocks there, whilst there was a bit of bulk of feed, some of them probably hadn't been given a graze through the growing season well enough. So I was concerned about the quality and the digestibility. So therefore, we decided to keep them on a shorter rest period to keep the weight gains a bit higher to get those animals to market faster. Now, if those animals were going to be held onto for longer periods of time, we would have changed the grazing plan to suit that plan with those animals. So you've got a lot of things just to pull together, don't you? It's about setting yourself up for a win. And so with this one here, what are your current classes? What's your marketing plan? What's your objectives? And what are your priority mobs? I think this is absolutely critical, is to think about your priority mobs and then think about how do I design a grazing plan that gives my priority mobs what they need? Because sometimes if you try and look after every mob, none of them actually get looked after. And you've got to prioritise and come back to what are the ones that are really going to shift the needle in terms of your business performance. Once you know what you got, then you can do your grazing plan. What's your stocking rate to carrying capacity? What rest recovery do they need? And how do you bridge those two together? And then what are your animal needs? And this is where you've got a balance between what's needed for desired production versus what's actually available. Matching the right mobs to the right paddocks. And that comes right down to, as you mentioned earlier on, about where you're going to be lambing or calving. And you design your grazing plan backwards so that those animals are in those paddocks when you want them. Because that's a bit of a hard stop, isn't it? That you want them there, so you design the system backwards. And then if you identify any potential issues, and then you come up with economic options to rectify. That's obviously very deliberate wording that we've got there, that it's identify any discrepancies between where you are, what your plan is, what your animals need, and then it's about coming up with some economic options to rectify. Because if it isn't economical, is that the right thing for us to be looking at, is the question we need to ask. So we've got time for Q&A now. So if you have a bit of a chance, I'd encourage you to anything that didn't make absolutely perfect sense, please ask questions. That's what we're here to help. Matt, I might just, what would you add, or how would you summarise the key points that we've gone through today?
To be aware of the possible nutritional deficiencies that are there, base that all on grass, because that's what's going to make you the most money if we concentrate on our grass. The big one for me is production does not equal profit. And I think that's an absolute key in our industry, that we need to focus more on profit and move our sole focus on production. Now, David, I've got a question for you. A lot of producers around the Wellington-Dubbo area are using lupins or faba beans just for about 5 weeks to lift their ewe lambs up to joining. Now, what I read from here, that's going into you're lifting your protein level feed. It's not a bypass protein. Is that correct?
Yeah, cracked lupins will have a more degradable, they'll be degradable protein, and energy will be the other one that's in it.
And faba beans, have you ever heard of faba beans being used? Or?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look. I don't know the numbers on these. I need to go and look at my notes again around it, but it's the same thing. When we're feeding a bean as opposed to a meal, it's going to be energy and protein, and then it'll be degradable protein. Quite often, obviously, they've got to be cracked or activated to be able to be used.
Yep.
Question to ask there is that the right time? Now, there's probably two things. Are you doing it for rising plane of nutrition? Because if we come back to your reproduction principles, we want animals on a rising plane of nutrition For sheep, it's 3 weeks prior to lambing and joining.
Yep.
And that's that key one there. So that's that rising plan nutrition. So are we looking to simulate that? And are there other options I'd put in? So you can simulate a rising plan of nutrition through speeding up a grazing plan.
Yeah.
Shorter rest periods, skipping them into fresh paddocks and on fresh feed. So you can do that at a very low cost way if you've got the forage resources to do that. If you're doing that because you need to get weight on, I just wonder, is that the right time? Should we have actually done that post-weaning? It's usually post-weaning, you've still got some energy availability in your grass. What of it might you bypass protein, so you might get bigger bang for buck at that point in time because you're feeding a smaller animal.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking at. We're trying to feed a smaller animal with a smaller maintenance requirement. So we've got more of that feed going into production.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thanks, David. Okay.
There's been some really good work done on lupins over
Yeah.
the years and what it can do.
Yeah. Thanks, David.